five major principles which I want to speak to. What does success look like? And as CFOs, it is important, number one, for you to, of course, the CEO is the head of your organization. You are the eyes of your organization to kind of co-create the strategy and provide your perspective. So you need to understand the strategy of the organization. It is very, very important. I don't think you can execute on your role and responsibilities without a clear understanding of the strategy. And like we've discussed earlier, strategy has to be forward looking, right? It is important for every organization to innovate because the moment you stop innovating, you die. And there are several instances of organizations that have died because they simply failed to innovate. And I'll give a practical example, right? So we all know about this airline called the Southwest Airline in the US, out of Texas. I think it was founded maybe in the 60s or 70s, right? When they started off operation, most of the other airlines, they just laughed at them. This company is just going to die. It's just going to die and go away. But they were very focused on their particular strategy, right? Because strategy is all about winning. Strategy is not about participating, right? If you're just participating, that is not a strategy. Strategy is all about winning. So this Southwest Airline started off, and then they focused on a particular segment of the market because they believe that based on their competitive strength, that is where they could play. So they focused on, the low cost part, of the business. They had lower cost. They focused on the fixed route. They're not doing all those connecting flights and all of that. So they just did the point to point, lower cost. In terms of booking, they just embraced digital rather than having so many travel agents and all of that, less luggage and all of that. So the bigger airlines at that point in time, they just said, you know what? This company is going to die very soon because how can you charge this amount of airfare, right, for flight? And Southwest got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And today, it's one of the top biggest top four biggest airline that we have in the US. Whilst others were looking, others were participating. And I think as a role as CFO, it is important that we clearly communicate and articulate the strategy. Leadership is all about followership, right? If you're leading and there's no one behind you, they say that that person is just taking a stroll, right? If you're leading and you look back and there's no one behind you, you're just taking a stroll. So it is important within the organization for every stakeholder, all the relevant stakeholders to understand that strategy. And it is important that the CFO is also able to devise or curate the key performance indicators for the organization. And I think I've also heard earlier today, one of the critical roles of the CFO is about resource allocation. How do we ensure that we allocate resources to where we can generate the best return, right? And I've heard several times, many stakeholders in the organization, they look at CFOs as the guy that is always turning down things. You take things to the CFO, he says, oh, no, right? So it's easier to get a no from a CFO than a yes. Not because the CFO is particularly about saying a no, but it is all about the resource allocation. How do we put our resources in places that will generate the best return for the organization? And it is important in our roles as well to be an active participant of transformation initiatives, right? Because of our vantage position in the organization. So that's the principle of A, which is alignment in the place of strategy. The second one is having a business mindset. I always say that you cannot give what you don't have, right? You cannot give an advice on what you don't understand. It is important for CFOs to leverage the helicopter view of the organization. We see everything in the organization. There's no other stakeholder within your company that has more view than yourself. So you should be able to leverage on the power of the insights that you have to be able to understand the business critically. And you cannot give advice on a business that you don't understand. So it is important that partnership is very key, regular interactions with the businesses. A CFO must see himself or herself as a chief performance officer. I see some organizations that have tried to change the name of the CFO. So I know of a particular company that says, okay, rather than CFO, this is the Chief Finance and Value Officer, right? Because by the time you reflect on your name, you can start acting based on that name. We've talked about communication, which is very important because if you don't communicate clearly, people don't understand you, right? So communicating the future state of the organization is very important, and clearly explaining what is required, right, of the stakeholders. And that's the reason why I like the principle of decomposition, right? The principle of decomposition is if you take key KPIs and decompose it into exactly what it means. At times we like speaking in abstract terms, right? We want to grow profitability by 50% and all of that. What does it mean to grow profitability by 50%? What does it mean to generate a return on capital of X percentage? Your ability to decompose it into, my former boss used to say, the lowest level of abstraction, right, into something tangible that people can lay hold on. Are we talking about pricing? Are we talking about volume? Are we talking about mix? Are we talking about utilization, turnover? Are we talking about leverage, right? So by the time you decompose, for example, your return on capital, then you're able to get what exactly are the specific action item that you expect from the businesses. The next principle, which I find very, very important, is your credibility, right? In our times, people don't look at the message, they look at the messenger, right? They look at the messenger. And as CFOs, it is important that our credibility is very intact. A CEO needs someone he or she can count on, right? That is credible, that is reliable, that is dependable, right? It is important that that person also needs to command in the organization, because once people do not respect you, then you just lose the message. So as CFOs, it is important that we know your stuff, right? It is important that people know you as a leader in this particular area. You're working with stakeholders in the organization, and once there is no trust, then it is very difficult for you to execute on your particular mandate. And finally, on this slide, in terms of the how, try as much as possible to leverage on the experiences of other people. Don't do it alone. I'm sure there are experienced people in your field, people that have come before you and all of that, your peers, your counterparts in the industry as well. Leverage on their experience as much as possible. So that leads me to the next principle, which is having a doctor mentality. The role of a CFO is akin to that of a doctor, right? It is important you state the fact, right? And also give valuable information. So I remember going to hospital, you run tests, blood tests and all of that has lots of numbers and jargons, and they tell you, oh, this number is between this range. It's supposed to be in this range, but your number is just a little bit at the lower end. So because of that, you need to do X, Y, Z in order to make this number at least to push up a little bit in the middle. So that's exactly our job, right? Our job is to be open and transparent in our dialogue, right? I can imagine a doctor or a patient not being transparent. You're just technically, that's a great disservice to yourself. So a CFO also is important to be open and honest. I liken a CFO also to be a chief diagnostic officer of the organization. You need to say it as it is, right? Tell people what they need to hear, right? Not what they want to hear. Don't play to the gallery. Always say things as it is. Tell people what they need to hear per time. And once you identify issues and challenges, it is important not to leave it at the background. And the last principle that I've put here is having the evolution mindset, right? There are times and there are seasons, right? The world we've had today, the world is changing and it will continue to change, right? The world that we, of course, pre-2019, if you had told somebody that, oh, let's set up a virtual meeting, I'm sure the person would have looked at you that, are you okay, right? Pre-2019 should have been, are you okay? But now, people are embracing the fact of virtual meeting because what COVID has dealt with us. So it is important as a CFO, you have to evolve in your responsibility. And how do you evolve in your responsibility? You've got to be able to, scan your market, scan your environment properly. Scanning your environment properly is very, very important. I like the phrase connecting the dot. You need to be able to connect the dot properly because if you're just looking inwards, internally, right, you're just at the receiving end. So our role needs to step beyond our confines, the familiar territory, understanding how, for example, the global economy impacts on us, right? So we've seen direction of interest, inflation rates in our market, the actions of central banks, in tightening monetary policies and all of that. So the question is, how do all of this impact on your organization? How does it impact on you? Inflation is running away, disposable income is coming down. How do you position your organization in a better way to ensure that you survive the storm? So it is important that we're able to connect the dot from the global to the country, to the macro, to the industry changes, the regulatory framework. It is important that we scan the environment, understand the changes that are taking place, not just the changes for now, but also the changes for the future as well. It is important that you're not a CFO of the past, right? You've got to be future-minded. It is important for you to be able to adapt to changes, right? The world is changing, so you've got to be adaptable as well. We've talked about leveraging on technology is no longer a choice, right? It is what you have to do, right? It's no longer a choice. You've got to automate your processes. You've got to leverage on artificial intelligence and all of that. But at the end of the day, our job as CFO will continue to be relevant only to the extent to which we make it to be very strategic.